there is injustice happening, and how do you stop it? You have to do something about it. But when you're a child, you don't know how. It's just vague.
We have here in She's Place today Ambika Satkunanathan. She's a human rights advocate and popularly known as a human rights activist. She was also a human rights commissioner at Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Welcome to the program, Ambika.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let me ask you first, what made you to be here? I mean, be what you are doing now?
Right, I suppose working on human rights.
That's exactly.
Driven a lot by my personal experiences. Because living in Sri Lanka, I have personal experience of conflict, violence, 83 riots, those things which are patchy memories that you can't quite remember, but it's still there. And the fear of violence, those were all very real at certain points in my life. And I think the sense of injustice, there is injustice happening, and how do you stop it? You have to do something about it. But when you're a child, you don't know how. It's just vague. It's only as you grow up and you go to university, you figure out. So like I think many people, I also had this, and I've come across many young people who want to do, what do you want to do? I want to work for the UN, because people think by going to the UN, you can bring about world peace and protect human rights. I too thought like that at one point. Now I realize my naivete. But then that's how I got started, and I started working in Sri Lanka with Dr. Neelan Trichelvam, and I think that was very important, particularly because of certain values that I learned from him. So in a sense, I think, and the way that he nurtured and mentored young people, who he helped and wanted them to go out and do good in the world. I think that is very important, to give that support to young people. I think those are things that what drove me, and also working with Dr. Trichelvam is what helped me get on the path of it, or to figure out, okay, I want to do this, but now I also know how to go about it.
And you have seen a lot of challenges in society, especially a society like in Sri Lanka. Why do you think that there is so much of resistance in Sri Lanka for liberal democracy?
Well, I mean, lots of people would probably disagree with you and say, oh, we are a great democracy, one of the oldest democracies in the region, etc. But I think we really haven't internalized those values of democracy. What does it mean? About elected representatives being held accountable. They're not demigods. We should challenge them, ask questions. But here they're treated like demigods and they're worshipped. There is a culture of patronage, right? They dispense patronage. They give jobs. They give something. So that is the kind of relationship that the voter has with the elected representative. So immediately you create a vast, that inequality which already exists. That just becomes larger. And we're still kind of a feudal society. We really don't believe in equality and equity, because even the way that we perhaps treat people who work for us, who do domestic work for us, the terms we use to refer to them, etc. So I think we claim we are an electoral democracy, yes, technically a democracy, but the problem here is people believe that their role as a citizen ends when they cast the vote. Usually that's when it's beginning, because it's your role as a citizen to hold the government accountable from one election to the next, right? So I think those are some of the reasons. And also just look at what we teach kids at home. Don't ask questions, right? In school. don't ask questions, you can't talk out of turn, you must listen to your elders. And so it means like whether what someone says is wrong or correct or sexist or it's a derogatory remark, they are told that they can't ask questions, right? And also we have quite a bit of casual sexism in society. There's casual racism in society. What certain communities, the kind of names they call them in this very casual way. So those are, I think, all reasons why I would say, yes, we are a democracy, but we're not an equal, equitable society where everyone has equality of opportunity, where if there is everyone is treated in an equitable manner. No.
Yeah. One important point you raised is this feudal society, and also it comes with this identity politics. Now, if you see the politics in Sri Lanka for decades, it has been divided into race and religion, right? How do you see the survival of this, liberal democracy in a society like this?
And this is something what you say, Shihar, is something that we also see in many countries, right? Ethno-nationalist politics, ethno-nationalism, and using the ethnic card or the religious card to garner votes, and even the caste card. That is something else that we don't talk about in Sri Lanka, but which does exist under the surface, right? So I think this is something that you see particularly in this region, you definitely see this. And that is a problem because that I think is also an obstacle to, in a way, internalizing liberal values. Definitely an obstacle, and also it is something that is used to further create conflict between communities, to incite violence against communities. We have seen that with what has happened. People, members of the Buddhist clergy inciting violence against the Muslim community, right? And the hate speech to which the Muslim community has been subject the last several years. And if you're a Tamil and you're talking too much, perhaps, then, or you're criticizing the government, then the other word comes, LTTE, then you're an LTTer. So that's how in real life, in everyday life, how ethno-nationalist politics comes into play and how it really has an adverse impact on the individual and your ability to access even like opportunities, right? Because of your ethnicity or religion, you could get discriminated. You could be subject to violence, and we've seen that happen, and we see it happen every day. So definitely, that is a huge impediment to internalizing liberal democratic values.
Okay, I mean, I think you have already answered this question directly, like how it's having an impact on minorities, right? But how can minorities manage in this kind of a feudalistic society and also identity politics? How can they manage and survive? In other words,
yeah, I mean, minority communities or the Muslim and Tamil communities haven't had a great time here, especially not lately also. How do they manage? Oh God, tough question. Of course, they continuously have to challenge the state, but challenging to demand for their rights to be respected and to be treated as equal citizens, because that's not happening. That is difficult because that can also make them vulnerable. It can make them vulnerable to violence. It can make them vulnerable to discrimination. So therefore, I think it is also important for communities to come together and to demand for the rights collectively as well, because any positive change, substantive change, is often brought only through collective action. And I think it's very important also for the majority community in this country to be aware that this kind of discrimination does happen. And it is nothing like people feel it's a loss of face to accept that it does. But the fact is it does. And it also happens in many other countries, right? So to accept it, and I think the majority community is also needs to understand that only if other communities are able to live in a fair and equal society without fear, without being discriminated, that you can also have a peaceful country where there is socio-economic development, etc. Because, any society that keeps one part of society oppressed really does not develop. That's what history has also shown us. There is always conflict and violence, etc. It's a cycle.
Okay, in this context, as a human rights defender, how do you see moving forward?
This is not a friendly environment. It's quite hostile for human rights defenders in many ways, because people are personally attacked. People are personally summoned to be questioned at various state security agencies, civil society organizations, particularly in the north and the east, receive visits from several security organizations asking them what they're doing. If you protest, there will be surveillance. If you protest, you may be arrested. We have seen trade unionists who've also been arrested, etc. So it's an environment that is quite oppressive. And therefore, for human rights defenders, it is a difficult environment because they are struggling for or working towards ensuring that other people who are in a far more vulnerable situation, that their rights are protected. But at the same time, the defenders themselves are under different forms of attack. So they have to protect themselves so that they can continue for another day to do the work to help really vulnerable and marginalized communities. So it's a struggle. I would say I'm actually very privileged. I always tell people, check your privilege. That's important. I'm very privileged in a sense. I have more protection than many others, right? Because of who I know or the positions I've held, etc. There are defenders in remote villages, environmental activists. There are defenders in the conflict-affected areas who are far more vulnerable, whose name many people don't know, right? Who don't have connections to seek protection or people voicing for them if they are under attack or threat. So I would say those are the people that we must identify and speak for, because especially those of us who have the privilege of, yes, we might be under attack, but compare me to someone else, I'm far more privileged and protected in that sense, right?
And we have seen this topic of human rights, especially during the final stage of the war and after the end of the war. And it's being used and abused, right, in local and international arena. How important it is for you? How important it is for you to be a human rights activist?
I would like to actually just maybe answer that slightly differently to say, how important are human rights? Actually, human rights are important for everyone. And I'll give you lots of examples from interesting ones from when I was at the Human Rights Commission. There were several people who were anti-human rights, who used to call human rights defenders as, NGO kaka, or as people who are spies for foreign countries and various things, or LTT or whatnot. But when their rights were violated, where did they come? They came to the Human Rights Commission, right? I don't want to name names, but big names. They came to the Human Rights Commission. So when their rights are being violated, they want them to be protected. So then they want the commission to function. They want defenders to speak on their behalf. But only when the defenders are saying something that is inconvenient to them or that is critical of the government they support, then they attack. So, but what people must realize, and I think those people still haven't realized, the ones who came to the commission, that rights are important for everyone, because you never know when you might be in a position of vulnerability. Therefore, I think it is something that is important for everyone. And rights work is not this big dramatic thing you do, no? It is something that you also do every day. I talked about democracy. People talk about democracy, but they wouldn't think twice about giving 500 rupees to the traffic cop. Oh my God, some ministers, 60 million corruption, everyone is outraged. But no one thinks twice about giving 500 rupees to the traffic cop. But that's also where it starts. It's it's part of the same ecosystem. So it's also about, I think, rather than people don't have to do something dramatic, It's about holding yourself accountable to the standards by which you want others to, function and abide by.
In other words, do you say, the human rights being politicized?
Human rights, firstly, politics is not a bad word. In Sri Lanka, it's become a bad word because we think about politics only about when it's linked to political parties. But that's a different kind of politics. But I think everyone should be political because your rights are about politics. Democracy is politics. You're not engaging in party politics. But you should be political in that you should care about what is happening in the country. So that's how I see politics. So I would say, when you say politicized, I would say that is in a way becoming subservient to party politics. Or it is a way that something is being weaponized against. But human rights is not being weaponized. It's people whose rights are being violated who are demanding that they be respected. That is being called politicized in a negative way. I don't think so. I think that's politics in a positive way.
And we have seen in the past, these human rights defenders coming up with, saying threats, physical as well as, verbal threats. How concerned are you on your own safety?
Mm-hmm. I've been getting this question quite a bit lately. I wonder why. As I said, what I told many people when they ask me this question is half humorously what I say is, human rights work is not something that you do during, Yahapalana or something. You know what I mean? It's not. Human rights work is something that you do when rights are most under threat, when communities are most vulnerable. So in a sense, if you're saying you do human rights work, you have kind of signed up for it. That said, it's each person's choice because each person has their own threshold, right, of how much threat they can or want to accept, and that is completely up to them. I would say I don't really think about it because, as I said, I think I'm more privileged than others, but at the end of the day, you really can't say because you're just an individual going about doing your own thing. But I don't think about it in that way. And the other thing that I tell people, I know mothers of the disappeared. I know human rights defenders, my colleagues, many in the North and the East, working for small community organizations who experience so much on a daily level in terms of surveillance, in terms of harassment, intimidation, visits, being summoned, etc., right? And they go through that and they do their work and they hold their head up high. So when they do that, can I say, oh my God, I am so frightened when I have the privilege, so many privileges that they don't have, right? So that's how I would answer your question.
Yeah. Being a woman and being from a minority community, is it different being a human rights activist?
Absolutely.
Compared to others?
Absolutely. And I think that is important for us to recognize that different parts of a person's identity can result in a person having different types of experience. So your religion, your ethnicity, etc., and if you're a woman, will impact how you experience something as opposed to someone else. So being a minority or a Tamil woman means that for the good part of last more than about 10 years, more than 10 years, I would say, I've had at random times when people don't like what I'm saying, I've had this label of LTT thrown at me. And I'm not the first one. Radhika Kumaraswamy has had thrown at her. Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam had it thrown at him, right? So it is a weapon that is being used. But at the same time, my experience as a Tamil means I have experience of violence. I have experience of fear of violence. I have experience of different forms of discrimination. Right? And even when I was at the commission, the fact that I was a Tamil meant that there were certain things that I experienced that others did not, where there were anonymous letters written about me that targeted ethnicity, right? And because I was a Tamil, this whole LTT thing being circulated by some people. So yes, all that happened because I am a Tamil, and some of it happened also because I am a woman, because some of those attacks were gendered attacks, right? So definitely, but I think that experience is something that also helps me be more sensitive to what others might be going through, because I can also see their different identities and how that makes them vulnerable to different forms of discrimination, marginalization, attacks, etc.
Now we are going to face another round of human rights sessions next week, starting from next week. How do you see Sri Lanka's human rights situation?
Well, I think...
Is it kind of really deteriorating, or do you have any hopes?
Well, I don't think, if we're in this kind of work, we can't say we don't have hope, no, because if we don't have hope, we really should not be here. But sometimes it's hard to hold on to hope. I'll be real. I'll be honest and say it's difficult. Because, economically, we see so many economic challenges that people face. Poverty, people being unable to feed their children, 3 meals a day. All that is happening in real life. I mean, I know people and I've talked to people who do experience that. We also see freedom of expression being curtailed, activities of civil society being curtailed. And we do see that the government appears to be intolerant of differences of opinion, of opposition, of criticism, of talking about human rights violations. So that is not a good thing, right? Because when the government was in opposition, they also talked about their rights, didn't they? They did. And I think some of them came to the commission also. So clearly human rights are important, as I said. It's not just when you're in power. Human rights are important not just when you're not in power, but also when you're in power, right? So I would say, yes, many rights are not... freedom of expression, freedom of association, and also police violence, police brutality is something that is systemic. That is not unique to this particular government or anything. That has happened for decades. The Prevention of Terrorism Act, decades. Prison violence, decades. So we have sexual and gender-based violence. Those are systemic problems that have existed for a long time that we are yet to tackle in a meaningful way. And into that, if you have also an oppressive environment, that makes it far more difficult to address these root causes.
And we have seen, Ambika, right, the government, saying that, some of these human rights organizations and defenders complaining, to international forum like UN, like either to bring resolution against Sri Lanka or, use trade concession like GSP plus as a leverage. Now, your name was also there in a statement by, the government. So, I mean, how do you see this? Like, should really this human rights organization, use, that kind of complaint to win the human rights?
Thing is, people go to the UN or wherever different mechanisms only when they feel that their rights are not being protected in the country, when they feel that their own government is not listening to them. I said this in an interview last week, is that in a way it is sad that we have to. The fact that we have to go to the UN and ask for this is sad, because that means our government is not doing its job of protecting our rights. Because whether I voted for you or not, you're still my government because I am a citizen. And as a government, you do need to protect my rights. That's your responsibility. So the fact that people are forced to go is sad because they have no other means. Now look at the Cardinal. What did the Cardinal say? He said he wants to go out to international, seek assistance from international mechanisms. Why? Because he feels that justice has not been done for the victims of the Easter Sunday attacks. So whenever, and even the current Prime Minister, when he was in the opposition, he took files of disappeared persons, and he himself went to Geneva, right? Why did he do that? Because, he felt that at that time there was no remedy here. The other reason why people go to international mechanisms, it's also to publicize what is going on. And to publicize meaning, if you don't make it public, no one will know these violations are happening, right? And no one will know that there are victims of these violations. Those stories will be forgotten and they will be buried. Now, so many journalists were killed. Now, if every year, people didn't bring up their names, Nimala Rajan, or, Lasantha Vikramatunga, or, if Prageet Ekneligoda, if their names were not brought up, then people would forget about them, right? People would forget these wrongs happened. People would forget their families were impacted. People would forget that they never got justice, which is why they're repeated again and again to make sure people don't forget. And that not forgetting is also so that people learn lessons and don't make the same mistakes again. But regrettably, governments seem to be repeating their mistakes, right? So,
just tell us, what do you see as positives, right, done by the government in terms of addressing the human rights issue so far? Maybe you can talk from the end of the war, from 2009. What has happened positive?
Yeah. Oh God, that's a bit tough. Because, after the war is when we saw the militarization increase, right? After the war, we saw that there was a denial of many of the violations that took place in the war. They should have taken the opportunity. There was an opportunity to acknowledge the violations, to inquire into violation, to give justice if you really wanted to achieve sustainable peace. Instead of which, they tried to control the communities, tried to deny violations, and tried to consolidate power in a rather authoritarian manner, because many of the violations happened, even all the extrajudicial killings of the journalists that I just mentioned now, enforced disappearances, things like that, and just a climate of fear. So I would say, rather than look to any government and say what they have done positive, I would like to say what I see generally positive in society is that, particularly over the last 2 years, I have noticed that younger people in particular really seem to they understand, or they're beginning to understand what it means to be a citizen. That kind of civic consciousness, because they are challenging and questioning parliamentarians, the government. How much did you pay for this vaccine as opposed to that vaccine? Why did you do an environmental impact assessment before putting that, laying that road? So younger people seem to be really voicing out. They're using their voice to challenge, the state on public interest issues. Of course, there is also a lot of hate on social media, but at the same time, there's also this positive thing that I have seen of younger people really exercising their duties as a citizen, which I have not seen in a long time. And also younger people, while there are also younger people spewing a lot of hate, I do see younger people who understand historical discrimination, who understand what needs to be done to build bridges between the different communities. So to me, that is the positive thing, that these younger, and they can see the hypocrisy of politics. So that to me is what I find heartening and positive.
Thank you, Ambika. Thank you very much for your insight and comments on on human rights, and all the very best on your future. And that's it from us for She Slays for this episode. Thank you.